Somewhere in the next day or so, you'll stand under hot water and think absolutely nothing of it. 700 years ago, in the towns of medieval Europe, that same ordinary pleasure, a proper bath, was something people queued for, paid for, sang about. And then, within a couple of generations, learned to dread, as though the water itself carried the pestilence. Both halves of that sentence are true. And the reason Europe turned against washing is stranger and far more human than the version you've probably heard. Paris, a raw spring morning in the 1290s. Fog off the Seine, wood smoke, wet stone underfoot. A man is working his way down the narrow streets with his lungs full, crying that the water is hot, the steam is up, come now while it lasts. He's a bathhouse crier, a real, regulated profession. The city's Great Book of Trades, compiled around 1268, actually forbids criers from shouting before dawn, because Parisians, then as now, guarded their sleep like treasure. Follow that voice, and you'd step out of the cold into fog of a friendlier kind. Wooden tubs deep enough to sit chest high, each one lined with a linen sheet so the staves didn't catch your skin. Rosemary and chamomile drifting on the surface. A steam room off to one side, braziers ticking, attendants moving through the haze with jugs, shears and towels. Pay a little extra, and they'd serve you supper and wine right there in the water. A bath and a meal, booked together the way we'd book a table. Behind the scenes, the operation was serious. Water hauled from the river or the wells, heated in great coppers, carried steaming to the tubs by staff who did nothing else all day. The city even fixed the prices, a couple of small coins for the steam room, roughly double for a tub of your own. And some houses served men, some women, some split the week between them. This was infrastructure. Ordinary, priced, argued over, which is exactly how you know it was normal. The scale still catches my students off guard. The Paris tax rolls at the end of the 13th century list more than 24 public bathhouses paying their dues, in a city you could walk across before your hair dried. And here's the honest footnote: tax rolls only count the houses that paid. However many there really were, the record shows us the floor, never the ceiling. That is the historian's oldest headache, and after 30 years, I've grown rather fond of it. Washing didn't wait for bath day either. Before a meal, and again after it, you rinsed your hands at a good table from a bronze jug shaped like a lion, a mounted knight, sometimes a dragon. They're called aquamaniles, and museum cases across Europe are still full of them, which tells you how utterly routine the ritual was. Arriving at dinner with unwashed fingers wasn't rustic charm. It was an insult to your host, and everyone at the board knew it. Cities built for this. London began laying the great conduit in the 1240s, piping fresh water into Cheapside so households didn't have to gamble on the Thames. And soap was big business long before anyone claims it should have been. Hard white soap from Castile, olive oil soap from Aleppo, and a London street named Soper Lane after the men who boiled it. The name outlived the trade by centuries. Streets, like habits, are slow to forget. Teeth were scrubbed with hazel twigs and powdered sage, mouths rinsed with wine or vinegar, hair washed with lye and sweet herbs. And there's a small thing that gets me every single time I visit a dig: the combs. Bone, boxwood, antler, they turn up constantly among the commonest personal objects the whole period left behind. A civilization does not carve that many combs if it has quietly given up on itself. The love of water ran old and deep. Around the year 800, Charlemagne planted his capital at Aachen, largely for the hot springs. The town's very name remembers the waters, and his biographer Einhard tells us the emperor swam there constantly, inviting sons, nobles, friends, even his bodyguard, until 100 people or more were in the pool with him. I've tried for years to picture the small talk in that water, and I fail happily every time. Centuries later, the habit got reinforcements from an unexpected direction. Soldiers and pilgrims coming home from the east had sat in the great steam halls of Constantinople and Damascus, and many historians credit those returning travelers with sharpening Europe's appetite for the hot, social, professionally run bath. Whatever the exact date, the timing fits. The 12th and 13th centuries are precisely when the bathhouse boom takes off across the West. The Church, for its part, never quite made up its mind. St. Benedict's rule offered baths freely to the sick, but told the healthy, especially the young, to take them seldom. Cleanliness was a virtue, luxuriating was a temptation. Monks washed hands and feet on a strict schedule and saved full immersion for the great feasts of the year. A small, cool draught under the door of a warm room. Keep hold of it. It matters later. Out in the secular world, water kept its dignity, even its ceremony. The night before a squire was knighted, he was bathed, a ritual cleansing before the vigil, the old self rinsed away with the road dust. Britain still hands out the Order of the Bath, and that odd, splendid name is the ghost of a medieval tub. Some German towns went further still and paid workers Badegeld, bath money, folded into wages like a meal allowance, Hygiene written into the payroll. And in the Rhineland, communities kept another kind of bath entirely. In Speyer, the Jewish ritual bath, the mikveh, was cut down through solid stone around 1120, a stair descending to still, cold groundwater. It survives. You can stand at the bottom of it today, in the hush, closer to the 12th century than almost anywhere else I can name. In Bath, the English city literally named for the thing, the King's Bath went up in the 1100s over the old Roman spring, and people soaked in it, hopefully and aching, for centuries afterwards. I've stood beside that green water on a cold morning with the steam lifting off it exactly as it did then, and felt the entire argument of this video rise with it. Medieval people were not strangers to washing. They were rather good at it. Which brings me to a confession I've been holding in since the title card. The notion that the Middle Ages stank from end to end is, to my mind, one of the laziest slanders in all of popular history. And I'd like to file a formal apology on the era's behalf. If you'll co-sign it, the like button is where the signature goes. If you're certain the whole period reeked regardless, the comments are open. Bring your evidence and I'll happily bring mine. Back into the steam because the Golden Age has perhaps 50 years left on the clock, and it's worth seeing at full strength. A bathhouse around 1300 was barber's shop, clinic and club in a single room. Attendants trimmed hair, pulled aching teeth, set cupping glasses, traded gossip with the towels. Guilds hired whole houses for feast days. In the romances, the first courtesy a good host offers a road-worn guest is not wine. It's a bath, and the keepers themselves are worth a nod. Bathhouse keeping was a licensed trade with rules about hours, prices and conduct, and in some English towns, the license rolls show women running houses in their own right. Respectable, regulated, taxed, the three dullest words in history, and the three that prove a thing truly belonged. Even King John, and English history has never forgiven King John for much, kept a servant whose entire job was the royal bath, a man the accounts call William. The rolls record his payments, a few pence at a time, roughly every few weeks as the royal travels allowed. Whatever else you hold against the king who lost Normandy and provoked Magna Carta, he settled his bath bill promptly. Fairness costs nothing, so let's hand him that much. October 1348. Hold that date in your hand. The Great Pestilence had come up out of the Mediterranean ports the year before, traveling the roads faster than any news of it could. By the time it finished burning through, somewhere between a third and half of Europe had perished. Stand in a doorway on any street you like and look down the row of houses. 1 in 3 of them, in the hardest hit towns, 1 in 2, fell silent. There is no gentle way to say that, so I've said it plainly. In Paris that October, the medical faculty, the most respected physicians in Christendom, are finishing a report for King Philip VI. The king has asked the only question that matters: why? Their answer, set down in careful Latin while the rain works at the shutters, blames the sky. A conjunction of 3 planets in 1345, they conclude, corrupted the very air. The enemy is not touch, the enemy is breath. Follow their logic 1 step further, because this is the hinge of the whole story. If corrupted air is the danger, then your skin is your armor, and anything that opens the skin opens the gate. Heat opens the pores, moisture softens them wider. A hot bath, by that reasoning, takes the one shield you own and quietly props it open. To the best minds of 1348, the tub was not dirty. The tub was a door. It's tempting to laugh at that from behind a wash basin, the modern world built precisely because they were wrong. I'd resist the temptation. Those physicians were watching their world end with the instruments they had, and their reasoning was internally sound. Mistaken at the first premise, rigorous every step after. Sitting where they sat, with what they knew, I genuinely can't promise I'd have thought my way out of it either. The advice travelled everywhere the fear did. Plague tracts, and there were hundreds of them, told readers to avoid hot baths and heavy exertion, to burn rosemary and juniper indoors to sweeten the rooms, and to carry a defence for the nose, dried herbs, ambergris, a pomander. That clove-studded orange some families still make at Christmas is a distant descendant of a medieval survival kit. Fear, it turns out, can outlive its own reasons for centuries, as decoration. And the pestilence did not strike once and leave. It came back, in 1361, in 1369, again and again, roughly once a decade for over a century. And every return rubbed the doctor's warning deeper into the grain of ordinary life. A single catastrophe can be survived and argued with. A recurring one rewrites you. And yet, and this is the twist most retellings miss, the bathhouses did not empty overnight. Habits are stubborn creatures. 3 years after the pestilence reached England, Edward III was having bronze taps fitted at Westminster Palace. Hot water and cold, plumbed straight to the royal tub in 1351. The king went on bathing while the theory that condemned bathing was still gathering its strength. Ideas move slower than water, and, in the end, further. Jump to 1416, to the spa town of Hardened in the Swiss hills, and you find the old world gloriously unbothered. A papal secretary named Poggio Bracciolini, an exhausted bureaucrat on a working holiday, wrote a letter home that historians have treasured ever since. Men and women in the pools, separated by wooden screens with little lattice windows cut through. Precisely so, the conversation never had to stop. Garlands on the water, singing, admirers tossing small coins to bathers who'd caught their eye. And then, my favorite detail in this entire story, meals served on little tables floating on the surface, so nobody had to climb out for dinner. I've turned that image over for years, and I still can't make the physics behave. The soup, the ripples, the elbows. If you can engineer me a stable floating supper for 6, the comments section is officially your drawing board, and I promise I'll read every blueprint. Poggio, half scandalized and wholly charmed, decided the people of Baden had found the thing his fellow scholars only argued about: contentment. Keep his letter in mind, because it proves something important. The fear and the pleasure ran side by side for generations. The 15th century did not wake up one morning hating water. It was talked out of water, slowly and thoroughly, by 3 separate pressures arriving at once. The first pressure was the purse. Heating a public bath devoured firewood, and across the 1400s, wood grew dear around the big towns as the nearby forests thinned. Prices crept up, custom crept down. The second was the pulpit. Mixed pools, wine, music, private rooms. Preachers had muttered about all of it for 2 centuries, and the muttering was hardening into sermons. In England, the bathhouses were bluntly nicknamed the stews, and the slow slide of that word into scandal tells you exactly how the argument was going. The word itself, by the way, comes from the Old French for a steam room, and it's the same steam word that ended up simmering on your stove. Your Tuesday night stew and a notorious medieval bathhouse are, linguistically speaking, cousins. English keeps the strangest heirlooms. Around 1496, Albrecht Dürer cut a woodcut of a men's bath. Friends lounging by the water with drinks and a flute, one of the most relaxed images the whole century produced. He carved it, without knowing, at the very edge of the cliff. History sometimes signs its own ironies, and that print is one of the signatures. The third pressure arrived in the 1490s and finished the job. A new and merciless illness swept through Europe. People called it the Great Pox, and it travelled through exactly the kind of close company the bathhouses were now infamous for. City after city bolted its doors for good. In 1546, Henry VIII ordered the Suffolk stews shut. And say what you will, a decree against indulgence lands rather differently coming from that particular king. With the baths gone, medicine filled the silence with a new doctrine. And it's one of the strangest ideas Europe ever agreed on. Linen washes you. A clean shirt, the physicians now argued, drew the body's impurities into the cloth, so you changed your linen often and left your skin respectfully alone. A gentleman proved his cleanliness at the collar and the cuffs, the only linen on public display. Hygiene outsourced to the laundry basket. Water retreated to the edges of the body, hands, face, mouth, and no further, unless a doctor prescribed a bath the way he'd prescribe a tonic, which occasionally, cautiously, he did. There's a famous line, almost certainly invented long after the fact, claiming Elizabeth I bathed once a month whether she needed it or not. I'd bet good money against the quote. I would not bet a penny against the attitude behind it. A few stubborn embers stayed alight, mind you. The spring at Bath never quite emptied even at the lowest ebb. The unwell still came, doctor's note in hand, because a bath taken as medicine was permitted where a bath taken as pleasure was not. The distinction tells you everything about the age. By the 1600s, the grand courts of Europe were perfumed rather than washed. Scent layered over scent, gloves steeped in jasmine, powder standing in for soap. And here is the irony I would frame and hang on my study wall if I could. The less Europe washed, the happier 2 very small creatures became, the louse and the flea. And the flea, of all things, had been the pestilence's actual courier from the beginning. Sit with that for one honest second. A continent, terrified of illness, gave up the habit that most inconvenienced the carriers of illness, on the confident advice of its finest doctors. There's no villain in this story, no fool either. Just one wrong first premise, defended brilliantly for 300 years. If history keeps a quieter warning anywhere on its shelves, I haven't found it yet. Here's the part I most enjoy telling students, because it turns the whole cliché inside out. If you want a genuinely unwashed Europe, don't look at 1250, look at 1650. The truly grubby centuries came after the Middle Ages ended, and later writers, gazing back past their own perfumed grandparents, pinned the smell on the medieval world instead. The myth of the filthy Middle Ages was built, quite literally, on the ruins of its bathhouses. 300 years, that's the honest length of the fear. From the door boltings of the early 1500s to the sea-bathing craze of the 1700s, when English physicians began prescribing cold plunges at resorts like Scarborough and Brighton, and water edged back into respectability, one shivering patient at a time. Even the word we reached for was a survivor. Spa, borrowed from the little town of Spa in the Ardennes, whose springs had been drawing the hopeful since the Middle Ages themselves. One more survivor, since we're collecting them. The warning not to throw the baby out with the bathwater first turns up in print in 1512, in a German satire. Proof that even as the bathing world wobbled, its proverbs were already immortal, which feels painfully apt. Europe threw out an enormous quantity of bathwater in those years. It came within an inch of throwing out the baby. The question in the title has earned its plain answer, both halves of it. How would you bathe in the Middle Ages? Cheerfully and in company, a crier to summon you, herbs on the water, a barber for your hair, supper floating past if you'd paid for it, half your street soaking within earshot. And why would you come to fear it? Because the finest medical minds alive looked you in the eye and explained that warmth opened your pores, and your pores were doors, and the air itself had turned against you. I've asked myself which I'd have trusted, the water I loved or the doctors I paid, and my answer changes about once a decade. In 1349, with the churchyards still raw, I suspect I'd have locked the tub away with everyone else. Courage comes cheap at 6 centuries' distance. It cost rather more at the time. Somewhere in a 15th century town, on a morning no chronicle bothered to record, a bathhouse keeper raked out his brazier and never lit it again. The criers went quiet, street by street, city by city, and a whole social world, the gossip, the garlands, the suppers drifting past on their little tables, steamed away into memory so completely that within a few generations, people sincerely believed their ancestors had never washed at all. Tonight or tomorrow morning, when the hot water hits your shoulders and you think nothing whatsoever of it, spare it one small thought. You are standing in a room the 14th century lost, and the 19th had to fight to win back. I'm Arthur, and this has been Arthur's Living History, recorded as ever from my cluttered study in Oxford. If an hour in the steam has earned a place in your week, subscribing keeps a seat warm by the fire for the next journey, wherever it leads, and I'm keeping that door closed even from myself. And I'd honestly love to know, down in the comments, in 1349, would you have kept bathing or bolted the door with the rest of Europe? Choose truthfully. History always finds out. Thank you for wading in with me. Whatever the centuries insist, the past never quite washes off.